Okay, so back closer to home, the more regional areas of Wollongong, Newcastle and even Western Sydney, are you advising any clients to buy in these areas?
There are definitely some great opportunities in these areas. Wollongong's an area that we think has some fantastic opportunities for investors. It's got a lot of layers to the market, which is a really good thing. There are also some risk factors though. The unit market in the CBD can very quickly and easily become oversupplied as developers flock to that market, and there's a lot of units coming out of the ground at the moment. So that'll soften the rental market and also potentially soften the growth a little bit in that property type. But outside of that, there are some great opportunities. Also important to be cautious though, because Wollongong Council has a lot of designated flood zones. So you have to do your research and you have to know where those are, or it can create issues with lending and insurance. But if you get out of that unit market and get out of those flood zones, it's a fantastic market where the rental returns are quite strong, the vacancy is very, very low, and the growth has always been quite good. A lot of job opportunity there as well. It's a stone's throw to Sydney. Newcastle we're not as active in. It doesn't seem to present as many opportunities for our investors as some of the other major regional cities. It's a little bit more isolated. And Western Sydney also has some really interesting opportunities. There's some bits you want to be in, some bits you don't want to be in, and everything in between. We don't tend to adopt a one-size-fits-all strategy. We match up the investor with their needs and goals and make sure the property and location suits that. So Western Sydney would depend on the investor's needs as well, where we would place them and why. So we look at every individual person's needs.
So you seem to be active in the Wollongong area for certain investors, and I know you know that market particularly well down there. What brings you to that area? Is it rental yield, is it capital growth, or is it a bit of a balance between both?
Yeah, it is a good balance between both. There's an affordable buy-in price for investors that we don't always see in most of Sydney. So there's an affordability factor for a lot of investors to get in. It does have fairly strong rental yields. Generally, we can see properties yielding between 4.5% to 5%, which is quite good in this market, and it does still have good growth. So to give you an example of that growth, Wollongong units had about 20.6% growth over the last year. Now that's on par with Sydney's inner west. That's really good growth. But as we just spoke about, that rental market can really soften when there's oversupply of units, and that can also soften the growth when a lot of developers enter that market, which we're seeing them do now and expecting that to continue over coming years. So it is about doing your research and knowing what part of that market you want to be in and what part to avoid. But we do have the statistics to show the growth is there, and so is the rental demand, and the vacancy is so low. So finding the balance is really key.
Okay, so you've talked about regional cities. In terms of regional towns, such as mining towns, I've known a lot of people to chase the very high rental yields that some mining towns offer. Is that too much of a risky strategy? What have you seen in those sorts of markets? And is it purely just a high risk, potential high return strategy? And have you advised any clients to buy in any of these regional towns?
That's something we get asked about a lot, and we don't adopt the one-size-fits-all strategy. So if we've got an investor that's interested in mining towns, we'll always talk to them about it. What we often find though is once we represent the risks that sit beside those rewards, often most investors feel it is too risky for them. So what are some of those risks? Yes, you get high rental returns, but it's very, very contingent on that mine staying open and performing. So as soon as that mine closes down, that growth falls off the property cliff, really, and so does that rental return. It could even be something as little as potentially that mine putting on all their own accommodation rather than having people stay in the town itself and using private rental accommodation. That can change the demand. So I don't know if you've been to a mining town recently, but they're really isolated. When you actually go into those towns, you realise there's a pub and there's a pub, and that's about all that's in the town. So it really resonates that they're hours and hours from everywhere, most of them. And without that mine, there's nothing else in that economy to keep that town going well and keep those values or rental returns high. So for most investors, yes, it does become quite a risky strategy when you lay out that risk and reward relationship.
Okay, and some of the other options other than your standard existing residential property, such as off-the-plan purchases, Have you got any words of advice on what to be careful of?
Certainly. We do see a lot of investors looking at buying new properties off the plan. There are some risks with that though, and the biggest risk we see is not being able to see the quality of workmanship. There are fly-by-night developers and builders out there, and sometimes we see these properties that have defects lists as long as your arm. And even though there are some insurances that can protect you against that, you don't want to end up in a legal battle with a builder, developer or insurance company at the end of the day. That's a really costly and frustrating process. You want to make sure the property you're having built will stand the test of time and be the quality of workmanship that you've paid for. So my best advice there would be research the developer, research the builder, actually find out what their past projects were and go look at them. Wander around the common property areas if it's a unit block. Go have a look at the house. If you're game enough, knock on the door of the owner and ask how the property has been over time. That would be a really good starting point with that.
So what are a few key tips you advise to people when they're selecting a property?
That's a really great question. Research, research, research would be the first one. You have to know what you're buying and what you're getting into. We actually have a giggle in the office from time to time because we see people spend more time in a car before they buy it than they do in a house. It always makes us laugh that a $30,000 investment gets more time and research in many cases than a $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000 investment. We also like to really warn people about some of the spruikers out there. Because the property investment industry isn't very well regulated at the moment, it really does allow a lot of spruikers to come into the industry. So to avoid getting caught by a spruiker, we have a list of questions we encourage everyone to ask before they work with someone. And we encourage them to ask that of us as well. And it's questions like, what are their qualifications? If they're a real estate agent, that agents are great at what they do. Don't get me wrong, we work with some fantastic agents, but they don't have multi-market knowledge and they don't work exclusively with investors. So they may not be the best person to be giving advice on overall investment strategies. They will probably know their market really well, but that will be the limitation of their knowledge. It's also really important to know who's paying that expert that's advising you. If you're paying them, that's fine. But ask them, are they getting any kickbacks from the developers whose stock they're selling? Or are they getting any kickbacks from local real estate agents? Or is that the only person that is paying them? There's a lot of investment experts out there that do get paid by the developer to on-sell the developer's properties. They might be doing a great job, but you should be asking, are they working in your best interest if they're being paid by someone else? Sometimes the answer will be no. You also want to make sure they actually have qualifications. We come across a lot of people who say that they're investment experts because they've bought properties and they've done well. And in some cases they might be an expert at that, but in a lot of cases they don't understand what's underpinned the growth of their portfolio or why some properties in their portfolio have actually underperformed. If you meet one of those sort of investment advisors, ask them, why did their properties perform well? Have they had any properties underperform and what caused that? And ask them if their goals are in line with your goals, because they might just have a model that worked well for them and be selling you their plan rather than building one that suits your needs as the investor. They're all really important questions to ask. If they can answer all of those questions and you feel comfortable with that advisor, move forward. But if they stumble on some of those questions, might be time to get some advice from someone else.
And here's a tip of my own. Get to know some experts in the industry. Do your own research, yes, but any property purchase involves significant funds and significant loans more often than not. So it's absolutely critical, in my opinion, to combine your own knowledge with the knowledge of an expert in the industry that thoroughly understands your investment goals. So Anna, what are the more common mistakes that you see people make when they're buying property?
We do see people making mistakes. One is that people procrastinate and wait too long to get into the market. They don't have the confidence to move forward, especially in a rising market. It can be overwhelming for buyers and investors to try and get into a market that's rising. They don't necessarily understand where the value of property lies. So they wait so long. And as an example of that, last year, with the 15% growth, if you owned a $400,000 property, you made $60,000 while you slept. So investors that waited that extra year and procrastinated missed out on all of that growth. And that's a mistake we see again and again. Another mistake is not working closely with their consultants like their accountants, like you guys. They buy the property and then they go see their accountant, but they've already bought it and it's too late to undo what they've done. And they could have had much better tax breaks and set it up in a structure that was much better for them personally. And I'm sure you could give much better advice than me on that, because we don't touch that area. But we always tell our clients how important it is to work with your accountant from the beginning, not after the fact. It's too late then sometimes. I'm sure you could help them get things structured up much better. And the last one we see buyers in general make is they let the agent lead them through the negotiations. So we see it all the time. A buyer asks an agent, how much should I offer for the property? Where should I start my offer? And the agent gives them a number and they make that offer. And it just makes us giggle because they're looking for someone to hold their hand and help them because it's an unfamiliar experience. But they maybe forget the agent's actually working for the seller, not for them. So we see those mistakes commonly time and time again.
Yeah, that's a really good point about working with your accountant when it comes to acquiring property. There's a range of vehicles that can be used when you are acquiring your property. So one of the really hot areas at the moment is purchasing property through self-managed super funds, for example. Now that's a much more complex structure and complex arrangement than just a purchase in your individual name. And there's a range of vehicles in between. So it is very important to deal with your accountant to get the best advice up front. So you've done a lot of work with property investors. Have you also done work with people that are looking to buy their own family home as well?
Definitely we help people buying their own home as well. So we don't often find the property for them like we would an investor, because it's a personal decision, but we come in and help them with the negotiations, where they're sounding board in the purchase process when they're looking for properties, and we can also sometimes help them get properties before they even go to the market, because the agents send them to us first a lot of the time. So we definitely have services that are affordable and really look after buyers' best interest, even if they're not an investor. It's the biggest financial decision you'll make in a lifetime to buy a property. So you really need to have someone working on your side of the fence, not just taking a lead from the selling agent. And that's what we specialise in. Buyers and investors, we help them buy and invest with confidence.
Very wise words. We might wrap it up there. Thanks very much for your time today, Anna.
Thanks, John. It's been a pleasure.